The birds were still chirping, and the coffee hadn't even cooled in my mug when I saw them coming. 3 HOA board members marching toward my dock like they owned the lake. The leader, a woman named Carolyn March, wore her HOA director windbreaker like armor and clutched a clipboard like a sword. "Mr. Blake Landon," she called out, her voice sugary with fake civility. "Depends who's asking," I said, sipping my coffee from a camping chair by the water. "We're here on official HOA business," Carolyn said. "There's been a complaint about your occupancy of this cabin. You are, by regulation, not a full-time resident, correct?" "I am now," I replied. "Bought the place outright 3 weeks ago." She raised an eyebrow. Cabin 11 sits on a communal lakefront, governed by the Rosewater Lake Community Association. Seasonal ownership is permitted. Full-time is not. I stood, stretching slowly. "I own the structure, and the deed includes lake usage rights. Your seasonal rule is internal policy, not law." Her smile tightened. "We have full authority to restrict access to communal grounds, docks, and amenities. If you continue to live here year-round, you'll be in violation, which means fines, and possibly removal." She handed me a formal notice. "Intent to evict. Unauthorized year-round residency." I laughed. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." What Carolyn didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that while she and her crew had been busy micromanaging flower pots and paddle boats, I'd been negotiating with the County Land Commission. See, this lake? It wasn't fully HOA owned. The land the HOA common areas sat on? Leased from a private trust. A trust that had quietly changed hands last month. To me. Not only did I now own the lakefront access used by 17 of the HOA's 24 properties, I also owned the boat slips, the fishing pier, and the road easement they all used to get to their cabins. I hadn't planned on using that leverage. Until now. Carolyn took one last look at me. "You'll be hearing from our legal team." "Fantastic," I said. "Tell them to pack a life vest." Because this HOA was about to be charged triple for the right to breathe near my lake. The best part about buying land that someone else depends on is watching them realize it. 3 weeks earlier, while finalizing the purchase of Cabin 11, I came across a curious footnote in the title documents. Use of communal lakefront granted by private lease, set to expire pending renewal. I dug deeper. Turns out the Rosewater Lake HOA didn't actually own the shoreline. In fact, the HOA had been leasing the most valuable part of the community, the lakefront access, docklands, and boat storage, from a family trust for decades. But the original trust holder had passed away, and the family didn't want the headache of renegotiating with a cranky HOA. I made a quiet call, then another, and for less than the price of a new pickup truck, I became the new owner of Parcel L, stretching from the boat launch to the popular fire pit patio. The HOA's crown jewel now rested on my deed. So while Carolyn March strutted around handing out fines and citations for overgrown grass and non-approved kayak colors, she had no clue that the land she was standing on no longer belonged to the HOA, and I had all the paperwork to prove it. After her visit to my dock that morning, I walked to the county registrar's office and submitted the new lease agreement I had drawn up the night before. It wasn't petty, it was profitable. Effective immediately, the lease fee for Parcel L would rise from $1,200 annually to $3,600. Triple. Due in 30 days, or use of the shoreline, docks, and fire pit would be revoked. I emailed the updated lease to the HOA board. No preamble, just the lease, the clause, the deadline. By 7 p.m., I got a reply from the HOA's treasurer, Howard. This must be a mistake. We've never paid more than $100 a month. Surely this was submitted in error. I replied with a scanned copy of the signed property transfer, highlighted in yellow. No mistake. Just business. The next morning, Carolyn was back, this time with Howard and a clipboard twice as thick. She didn't knock. She marched right up to my porch and waved the paper like a white flag. You think you can extort us because of some loophole? I set my coffee down slowly. It's not a loophole if I bought it legally. This is malicious. No, I said. It's market rate. And after you threatened to kick me out of my own cabin, consider it discounted. Howard, the treasurer, leaned in. You do realize this affects nearly every member's lake access. This will cause a community revolt. I shrugged. Then maybe the community should elect better leaders. Carolyn's face flushed red. This isn't over. No, I said, stepping back inside. It's just getting started. Because in 28 days, their beloved lakefront would be closed. Unless they paid up. By day 5, I could practically hear the HOA scrambling. Emails started flying, first polite, then panicked, then passive-aggressive. We believe the fee increase is excessive and possibly unenforceable. Our legal advisor is reviewing the original lease terms. We may need to schedule a special board vote regarding Parcel L. It was amusing watching a group so accustomed to issuing demands suddenly stuck reacting. They'd never imagined someone would outmaneuver them at their own game. That Monday, I spotted Carolyn and Howard down at the community dock. Clipboard in hand, they were measuring the property line with a contractor, clearly hoping to find a boundary loophole. Too bad I'd already had the entire parcel professionally surveyed and recertified. The dock, the kayak racks, even the gravel fire pit with the HOA's commemorative plaque. All of it sat squarely on Parcel L. My parcel. I knew what they were hoping for, that a judge might rule the lease fee increase as unreasonable or a form of community blackmail. But their biggest problem, precedent. The original lease, written in 1989, had a key clause. This agreement shall be renegotiated at the end of each 10-year term, at the landowner's sole discretion. I wasn't breaking the lease. I was fulfilling it, at triple the cost. When I checked the HOA's website that evening, I noticed something new. A banner on the homepage reading, Urgent, Special Member Meeting, Lease Crisis Discussion. I couldn't resist. I showed up. The clubhouse was packed, every chair filled, tension simmering. Residents whispered as I entered, most of them recognizing me as the guy in cabin 11. Carolyn stood at the front, hair pulled tight, voice louder than usual. We're doing everything we can to resolve the situation. Our legal team is exploring options. A hand went up in the crowd, a tall man with a gray beard and fishing vest. Is it true we might lose access to the dock? Carolyn hesitated. Not if we act quickly. Another voice piped up. How did we let this happen? Howard cleared his throat. It was an oversight. The parcel changed hands unexpectedly. I raised my hand. They couldn't stop me from speaking. Technically, I was a community member. Just so everyone's clear, I said, stepping forward. Nothing was done behind your backs. The property was listed publicly. The lease was expiring. Your leadership chose not to act. Carolyn glared. You ambushed us. I made a purchase. You made threats. I responded with a fee increase. That's business. Murmurs spread. A few heads nodded. One woman even whispered, Finally, someone stood up to them. Carolyn tried to regain control. Regardless, we will not be intimidated by scare tactics. I smiled. You'll just be locked out of your docks. But sure, no intimidation here. I left the meeting before the shouting started. Because the real show? was just beginning. By the end of the week, the HOA board was bleeding support. Word had spread fast, too fast for Carolyn to control the narrative. Residents who once blindly obeyed her rules were now furious. Not at me, but at them. Cabin owners who had invested their savings into lakeside getaways were suddenly facing locked docks and canceled family weekends. The threat wasn't theoretical anymore. It was real. And Carolyn was losing her grip. She sent out a desperate newsletter with words like extortion, legal overreach, and emergency vote. But the more she pushed, the more residents pushed back. Some even started knocking on my cabin door. The first was Angela, a retired schoolteacher from Cabin 9. She brought muffins. "I just wanted to say," she began nervously, "not all of us are with the HOA. Some of us. We're grateful you're finally standing up to them." "You're not mad about the lease increase?" I asked. She shrugged. "I've lived here 14 years. I've been fined for bird feeders, porch chairs, and letting my grandson splash too loud. If I have to pay a bit more each year so they lose their stranglehold, it's worth it." 2 days later, 3 more neighbors stopped by, this time with an idea. "Blake," one said, "you own the land under the docks, right? What if you leased slips directly to us?" My eyes narrowed. "You're asking to bypass the HOA?" "Exactly." It was bold, risky, and completely legal. I didn't promise anything, but I listened. And later that night, I drafted a new proposal: private use dock permits. A dozen slips available for direct rental, each resident paying me instead of the HOA. I attached the rates: fair, reasonable, and importantly, cheaper than what the HOA was threatening to hike fees to if I didn't budge. Then I sent it to the community email list. No pressure, just an option. The response? Overwhelming. 10 of 12 slips were spoken for in under 48 hours. Carolyn hit the roof. Her next HOA email accused me of undermining community cohesion and fomenting rebellion. But now, even her inner circle was cracking, because at the next board meeting, something shocking happened. Howard, her loyal treasurer, stood up and said, "I think we need to sit down with Blake and work out a deal. We can't afford to alienate half the neighborhood." Carolyn turned white. "You're siding with him?" "I'm siding with reality," he said. And just like that, the Queen of Rosewater Lake lost her right-hand man. The envelope arrived on a Friday afternoon, thick, heavy, and certified, delivered by a courier who didn't even make eye contact as he passed it to me. Inside was a 6-page letter, printed on law firm stationery, with the words "Cease and Desist" stamped at the top in bold. Carolyn had officially gone legal. The letter accused me of undermining the HOA's authority, interfering with community lease contracts, engaging in predatory real estate practices, and, my personal favorite, fomenting dissent among residents. I chuckled reading that last one. Her lawyer, a local firm I recognized from town, had clearly been fed a highly skewed narrative. The letter ended with a demand: cease all individual dock lease activity immediately, or face civil litigation for damages and injunctive relief. I didn't flinch, because I knew something Carolyn didn't. Their case was garbage. The HOA didn't own the land. They were leasing it. And I had every right, as the landowner, to revoke access or release directly to individuals if the association refused to renew in good faith, which they had. Still, I called my own attorney, a real estate specialist named Darnell. He read the letter, snorted, and said, "This isn't a lawsuit, it's a tantrum with a letterhead." "But do I respond?" I asked. "Oh, absolutely," he said. "Let me draft something with just the right tone." 2 days later, we sent our reply. We reject all claims as meritless. Mr. Landon is acting within his legal rights as the rightful property holder of Parcel L. Any attempt to bar him from leasing his land will be met with counter-litigation and pursuit of damages for defamation and loss of income. And just for fun, we CC'd the county zoning board and the registrar's office. The very next day, I got another visitor. Carolyn. No entourage this time. No clipboard. Just her, standing at my gate, arms crossed. "I should have known you'd lawyer up," she muttered. "You started it." Her eyes narrowed. "You're destroying this community." "I'm cleaning it," I said, "from the inside out." She walked closer. "What do you want, Blake? A power seat? A board position? Money?" "What?" I took a slow breath. "I want to enjoy my lake cabin without being harassed. I want families to stop getting fined for chalk drawings. I want people to feel like neighbors again, not subjects." Carolyn scoffed. "You think this is over?" "No," I said. "I think this is the part where you start losing." And lose she did. The next HOA vote meant to raise community dues to cover legal defense costs failed spectacularly, 17-2 against. Then came the resignations, first the secretary, then the events chair, then Howard, for good. By the end of the week, Carolyn stood alone at the top of a crumbling pyramid, and the clock on their expired lease ticked ever louder. Day 30. The lease payment was due. No check arrived, no bank transfer, just silence from the HOA. By 10 a.m., I delivered the official Notice of Access termination, hand-signed, notarized, and affixed to the bulletin board at the community dock. Effective immediately. Access to Parcel L, including docks, fire pit, and boat ramp, is hereby suspended due to lease non-renewal. Trespassing will be prosecuted. For private access agreements, contact Blake Landon, landowner. I posted one at the kayak shed, too, and the pier. Then I locked the gate to the dock with a brand new chain and padlock. I didn't want conflict. I just wanted clarity. But conflict found me anyway. By sunset, Carolyn came charging down the gravel path with 2 members in tow, still loyal, or maybe just confused. "You can't block the dock," she barked, tugging at the chain. "I can, and I did." "You're cutting off the entire community." "No," I said. "I gave you a lease renewal at a fair rate. You refused. You thought I'd back down." She stepped closer. "You're isolating residents. Do you think they'll side with you now?" As if on cue, Angela from Cabin 9 appeared behind her. So did the man in the fishing vest, then 2 more neighbors. "I'm with Blake," Angela said. "We signed individual agreements. We're fine." "I paid my slip fee last week," said the fisherman. Carolyn's mouth dropped. "You went around the HOA?" "No," I said. "They came to me. Your monopoly ended the day you threatened me with fake eviction." Then I handed her a copy of the usage report. 10 out of 12 dock slips rented, fire pit access permitted to named individuals, income reported to the county. Clean, legal, bulletproof. She stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "People will forget this," she whispered. "They'll turn on you. They always do." "Maybe," I said, "but not today." And right on cue, little Tommy from Cabin 7 paddled by in a red canoe, his mom waving from the beach with a picnic basket. "Thanks for fixing the dock ladder, Mr. Landon," he called. Carolyn flinched, because it was her last weapon. Community fear that had just slipped beneath the waterline. She turned and walked away. Not a word more. And for the first time since I'd arrived, the lake was peaceful again. Within a week of the lease cutoff, the cracks turned to collapses. The HOA, once feared and followed like gospel, had become little more than a name on stationery. Board meetings, cancelled, newsletters, dead, fines, challenged and refunded. Half the members openly defied the rules. The rest simply ignored them. The lakefront was no longer HOA-controlled territory. It was a neutral zone, privately leased and locally respected. Carolyn hadn't been seen in 3 days. Her porch lights stayed off. Her trash piled up. Word around the cabins was she'd been meeting with a private mediator, desperate to salvage some part of her authority before the annual vote. But it was too late. The community had already started rebuilding without her. Angela from Cabin 9 organized a kids' kayak race. No permits, no fees, just hand-painted signs and lemonade coolers. 17 families showed up. I stood by the dock, managing the timing board. Not one person mentioned the HOA. Instead, they asked me something I hadn't expected. "Blake, why don't you help run the new board?" At first, I laughed it off. But more people asked, and not just in passing. Even Howard, who'd once stood shoulder to shoulder with Carolyn, came by with a folder. "I've done the math," he said. "If we form a resident-owned trust, we can buy out the HOA's remaining obligations and replace it with something better, more flexible, more fair. We need someone with leverage, someone people actually trust." He paused. "You." I looked out at the lake, calm, sparkling in the evening light. I hadn't come here for politics, but if I didn't step up, someone like Carolyn might again. Still, I wasn't ready to give an answer. Instead, I asked for time. And then, that night, just as the sun dipped behind the tree line, I got a knock at the door. It was Carolyn, alone. No clipboard, no blazer, just her in jeans and a faded hoodie. She looked tired. "I came to talk," she said quietly. I let her in. She stood by the fireplace, not meeting my eyes. "I lost," she said flatly. "I know that." I stayed silent. I wanted to build something lasting, but somewhere along the way I got obsessed, controlling. I see that now. She took out a folded letter and placed it on the table. "My resignation, from the board, and a request. Let me stay as a resident, quietly. No power, just space to start over." I studied her. Not the tyrant who fined garden gnomes, but someone cracked open by consequence. "You can stay," I said, "but you don't get a second crown." She nodded. "Fair." And with that, she turned and left, without demanding a thing. By week 2 of Carolyn's quiet resignation, everything had changed. No more surprise inspections, no more cold notices tacked to cabin doors. The HOA building itself, once a monument to control, sat dark most days, the bulletin board now covered with hand-drawn flyers for potlucks and paddleboard meetups. The community had taken over. But without a board or structure, things were starting to drift. Trash pickup got delayed. Maintenance issues piled up. Someone needed to lead, not to command, but to coordinate. And that's when the residents called another meeting. This time not under HOA rules, but in the open-air pavilion by the lake. No stage, no microphone, just a big wooden table and rows of folding chairs. Angela opened the floor. "We've all seen what doesn't work," she said. "Now let's build what does." Voices chimed in from every direction. Suggestions flew. A volunteer committee. Rotating leadership. Seasonal dues based only on actual needs. Finally, Howard stood. "Let's be clear. We still need a charter, a structure. Someone has to sign checks and file taxes, but we don't need a ruler. We need a steward." All eyes turned to me. "Blake," Angela said, "you turned the tide. You held the line. You already own the most critical parcel. This won't work unless you're part of it." I took a long breath. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about the lake, the people, and the trust that had grown between us. "All right," I said. "I'll serve, but not as president, not as a figurehead, as landholder liaison. I'll oversee lakefront operations, nothing more." They voted on it then and there. Unanimous. We called it the Rosewater Cooperative, replacing the HOA with a charter focused on community consent, limited authority, and shared resources. And the first act? Everyone got a clean slate. All past fines wiped, all rules reviewed by vote. Carolyn's name was quietly removed from records. No ceremony, no spectacle. She stayed in her cabin, planted a garden, waved once in a while, and the neighborhood healed. Later that month, I received a letter from the county. It said, "Congratulations. Rosewater Cooperative has been formally registered, charter accepted, nonprofit status pending." I pinned it to my cabin wall, a reminder that you don't win by controlling people. You win by earning their trust. The storm hit without warning. A rogue summer squall rolled in from the east, catching everyone off guard. Winds howled through the trees, rain hammered roofs, the lake surged, swallowing the shoreline in frothy waves. Within hours, the fire pit was underwater, and the community dock, my dock, snapped loose at one end and tilted dangerously into the lake. Cabin 6, the old blue one near the bend, had a pine tree crash through its porch railing. Angela called first. "Blake, the kayak shed's gone, floating out in the water somewhere." I was already pulling on my boots. By noon the next day, the skies cleared, but the damage was done. This was the kind of thing the HOA used to mishandle, charging cleanup fees, blaming residents, refusing emergency access because of insurance limitations. But now, we had no HOA. We had us. I walked to the dock remains. A few others joined. Howard arrived with his toolkit. Angela brought coffee and a long list of cabin owners who wanted to help. Nobody asked for permission. They just showed up. Within 24 hours, we had crews digging trenches to redirect water. Teenagers tied rope lines around fallen branches. Older residents provided food and ran errands. No fines, no red tape, just a real community. I climbed into the lake waist-deep with a drill in hand and helped reset the dock planks. The water was freezing. My hands were blistered, and I couldn't stop smiling. That evening, once the rainwater drained and the bonfire pit dried out, we rebuilt the fire ring, stone by stone. We lit the first blaze that night, smoke curling into the purple dusk. No rules, no clipboard, just chairs, marshmallows, and the sound of neighbors laughing like they hadn't in years. And when Tommy's dad from Cabin 7 stood up and raised a paper cup to toast, he said something I'll never forget. To Blake, who didn't just fight back, he built something better. I shook my head. We built it. And for the first time since I'd moved into my little lake cabin, it truly felt like home. 3 months after the storm, the lake was still. Calm ripples danced across its surface. The dock stood sturdier than ever, and wildflowers had bloomed along the rebuilt fire pit, proof that nature, like community, could thrive when given room to breathe. The Rosewater Cooperative was no longer an experiment. It was working. Monthly meetings were casual but efficient. Volunteers rotated cleanup duties. Dues were small, based only on actual needs. Every cabin owner had a vote, and no rule was passed without full transparency. And best of all, no one missed the HOA. Carolyn kept to herself. She planted hydrangeas, painted her cabin. She didn't try to rejoin or reclaim control, and no one asked her to. Peace, once a fantasy, had become reality. One crisp morning, as fall rolled in with gold leaves and cooler air, I stood on my porch sipping coffee when Angela arrived with a clipboard, not HOA style, but the friendly kind. "We're holding the first annual vote for next year's community committee," she said with a grin. "You've been nominated as full chair." I nearly laughed into my mug. Who nominated me? Basically, everyone. I looked out at the lake, at kids skipping rocks, at couples kayaking, at neighbors fixing things together. I didn't need power. I already had something better. "Tell them I'll accept," I said, "but only if it's called Lake Steward and not some fancy title." Angela nodded. "Perfect." Later that day, I walked down the dock and sat at the edge, toes just grazing the surface. The sky was streaked with orange. The lake whispered the same soft rhythm it had on my first day here. Only now, that whisper sounded like home. No gates, no fines, just good people who'd taken back their freedom. And all it took was someone saying, "You don't get to rule this place, we do."